I still remember when Dead Space came out way back in 2008. What started out as a gift from my dad ended up turning into one of my most influential gaming experiences ever. I wasn't supposed to be playing Dead Space, but unfortunately for my dad, who worked his ass off for my brother and I, he had to sleep. 13-year-old Nick on summer vacation, not so much. And you best believe that I played the living shit out of Dead Space. Dead Space is one of those games where you'll always remember your first playthrough, creeping through the claustrophobic halls of the Ishimura and hearing the clangs, screams, and the sounds of Isaac's panicked breath echo around in your headset. Dead Space was so scary that I remember having to pause the game just so I could look over my shoulder and make sure there wasn't a necromorph creeping up behind me. There's so many things that make Dead Space such a special game, and fans have been hoping for its return for years now. So it's no surprise that when rumors started popping up left and right about a remake or a reboot, everyone lost their shit. And as a die-hard Dead Space fan, I'm right there with them. So today we're going to talk about whether or not Dead Space even needs a full-on remake, and what a revival could even look like in 2021 or 2022. Before we get into that, let me give you a little background on the current state of Dead Space. The Dead Space franchise has been completely dormant since 2013 after the release of Dead Space 3 and its DLC called Awakened. EA desperately tried to merge modern gaming trends with the series so that they could drive up sales numbers. Dead Space 2 did amp up the action quite a bit from the original, but it still balanced horror and action extremely well in my opinion. It even had a multiplayer versus mode where you could play as the necromorphs, but the mode was kind of lacking and it wasn't really enough to keep players coming back over time. But even after doubling the sales of the original, those numbers still weren't enough for EA, so they pushed Visceral Games to double down on the action and multiplayer again, and in 2013, we got what we all know now as Dead Space 3. The third game changed a lot about the series, turning what was once a tense survival horror series into a full-blown action game, adding in cover and rolling mechanics, epic shootouts, over-the-top weapon mods that were cool, but you could make some seriously broken builds, like damn near a fully automatic plasma cutter, which actually ended up being my main. Microtransactions that would let you completely bypass resource management, and adding in co-op that not only took away from the scare factor, but also broke the single-player experience because your buddy Carver will just pop in at cutscenes and then magically vanish again like frickin' Batman.
Here is as stubborn as you are.
And when Dead Space 3 didn't sell or necessarily score as well as the other games, EA just assumed fans simply lost interest and put the series on ice. Visceral Games closed down a few years later, leaving fans with some broken PC ports, no next-gen updates, and little hope for their favorite, heavy-breathing, overly complicated helmet-wearing hero to ever make a comeback. Until now. Remaking a classic is always a challenge, and remaking or rebooting a game like Dead Space will take an immense understanding of what makes the game so special to begin with. From the story, to the sound design, the gunplay, this. The gameplay is just so fun and satisfying. There's really something special about it. As Isaac, you have a few very simple mechanics. You have a melee and stomp, of course, you have kinetic powers, stasis, and if you're smart with how you use these mechanics, you can take down enemies without firing a single bullet. The combat isn't as simple as just shooting enemies until they're dead. It's about understanding your limitations as the player and finding creative ways to survive an encounter. The enemy design of Dead Space is also really important to the game because enemies aren't just bullet sponges. In order to kill them, you have to strategically dismember them. They don't go by the traditional zombie rules of just go for the head. You can shoot off their head, but it just pisses them off. And if you cut off their legs, they will claw and crawl their way to you until you're finally able to put them down for good. And even then, you might as well stomp them 2 or 3 times just to be sure. The way the enemies are designed, the way that the environments allow you to creatively approach an encounter, it just makes the game so replayable, and it's why I keep coming back to Dead Space so many years later. Dead Space is an incredibly immersive game, and it's able to achieve its level of depth and immersion by doing a few very smart things, one of which is the sound design. The ambience of the Ishimura is oppressive. It really makes you feel like you're in a cold, empty, and broken spaceship. You feel alone and vulnerable. You can hear things getting knocked over behind you, screams off in the distance. The necromorphs run through the vents of the ship around you. Dead Space is able to scare you with just sound alone. And there's no better example of this than the engine room.
You get into an airlock and it shuts down quiet again. Then you open the door and it's just and people are running in the room. They are just trying to get out of that room. It's so awesome.
The sound design of Dead Space is absolutely crucial to the experience, and I really hope that's something that they can replicate in a remake or a reboot. But if we're talking immersion and Dead Space, of course we have to talk about the HUD, or lack of there, actually. Dead Space doesn't have a HUD. Instead, Visceral managed to do something really special by fixing all of the HUD elements onto Isaac and the weapons models, rather than having them just sitting on the screen. Your health bar and stasis are on his back, ammo is shown on the weapon itself or in your inventory. Even something as simple as checking your waypoint is initiated by Isaac himself, where he projects a holographic trail on the floor. Even further, checking your inventory, looking at the map, and reading logs makes sense in the gameplay. Your inventory screen never pauses the game. This works the same way with every UI element in the game, and that may seem like a small thing, but it's incredibly important, because when you're playing Dead Space, you are never taken out of the experience, which also means that you are never safe. Unlike in a game like Resident Evil 4, where every time you crack open your inventory or switch weapons, it basically pauses the game and gives you a moment of relaxation. You don't get those moments in Dead Space. While you're sitting there shuffling through your shit trying to figure out what health pack to use, you can straight up get jumped and killed at any moment. You really have to be careful about when and where you stop for a break. And cutscenes are the same way. Every moment is interactable. Whether you're watching your team get torn to shreds and then running for your life, or getting dragged down a hallway by a giant Rule 34 tentacle. Okay, so we know what makes Dead Space great, but what would the series coming back actually look like? I think a reboot of the series makes a lot of sense, and let me tell you why. The last we saw of Isaac, he finally managed to fight his way back to Earth after literally killing a moon, only to find out that the necromorphs had infested the entire planet. And as much as I'd love to find out how that story ends, a reboot that delves back into the horror and dread of the first game in particular would probably be the best course. But on the other hand, Dead Space is also in a weird place where a full-blown remake isn't exactly necessary. I've seen a lot of people comparing a possible Dead Space remake to something like the Resident Evil 2 remake, but most of Dead Space's story and gameplay still hold up today. Dead Space could definitely benefit from getting the remaster treatment though. Modern graphics tech like ray tracing, DLSS, and motion capture would make Dead Space look so damn good, even more terrifying and disgusting than ever before. And giving the original some of the quality of life improvements from the sequels would also really add to the game. Like, I don't know, allowing you to melee in all directions instead of just horizontally, make the stomping of the original a little less clunky, and maybe even implement the control scheme from the sequels as well. One thing that I could see getting touched up or maybe even completely overhauled in a remake is the zero gravity sections. So in the first game, in zero gravity, you would basically just jump from wall to wall using your mag boots, but you couldn't just really float in the air. You would basically just be switching what wall you're standing on. But in the sequels, you were free to float around all the environments and land on whatever surfaces you needed to. I personally wouldn't mind if they revisited how zero-G works in the original, because in Dead Space 2 especially, the zero gravity sections are just so fun and satisfying to me. I've been replaying the original on Xbox because the PC port is basically completely broken, and although these sections are still fun and interesting, they can be a little jarring at times, and they're starting to show their age a bit. If you're gonna give Dead Space the remake treatment, do it like the Demon's Souls remake, where you give it a beautiful fresh coat of paint, fix some of the clunky stuff, and elaborate on and touch up any outdated mechanics. So to finally circle around to my original question, should Dead Space come back? Absolutely it should. And it's really seeming like it will. Over the past few weeks, I have seen dozens and dozens of articles, tweets, and videos talking about Dead Space coming back. And if it wasn't true, EA probably would have shut this down at this point, but they haven't. And currently there is a huge gap in the gaming industry for big AAA survival horror games, with Resident Evil pretty much having the monopoly. It's been pretty sad to watch survival horror games become less and less common over the years. With AAA games becoming so expensive to make these days, AAA publishers are less willing to take risks on weird and unique IPs. So bringing back Dead Space, while not a new IP, it's still a very unique game. I hope that EA revives Dead Space. Not only because Dead Space is awesome, but because if it sells well, then it could help pave the way for more of those weird, dormant IPs to come back as well, and maybe even get publishers to experiment on some unique ideas again. In short, EA, give the gamers what they want. Dead Space Battle Royale. This week, we're gonna see what this new Dead Space reboot is made of. And if you want me to cover more Dead Space, be sure to let me know in the comments, because I can talk about Dead Space pretty much all day. But thanks for checking out the video, guys. If you made it through, dropping a like helps me out a lot, and be sure to stick around because there's a lot of cool stuff coming up. You can follow me on Twitter at NickRespawns, and until next time, have a good one.